Wow. So that was an interesting session, Zale. What did you think?
Um, I gotta say, you're absolutely right. I couldn't see much of what was going on in Europe, but given what was happening here in the Asia that you're looking at, it's been a spicy session for sure.
Yeah, so welcome to another episode of Mordred's multiplayer community game. And Zale and I are going to talk a little politics and catch folks up to speed on what happened this past Saturday. We'll start over here in Asia, Zale. When we left, Vijayanagar, Bengal were at war with Malaya and Ashikaga. You see now we've got Vajanagari Indochina. Looks like they've come to some sort of agreement. Any details you can share on that front?
Um, there's not much I can say beyond the obvious. They came to a deal. I wasn't too involved in that. I thought that I thought it was good for them to make the deal. I was hoping for there to be a white piece since it seemed like all VJ really wanted out of that was trade power, he said. So I kind of expected what we'll get into later to happen, and I mentioned it a few times, but yeah, I think it was a decent deal. I'm not gonna say it was a great deal, but it was a decent deal. Definitely sort of the best that Malaya could have expected out of the situation they were in.
Yeah, Malaya maintains tremendous trade power here in the Malacca node. The value of it starting to add up, over 30 ducats incoming and local, only 6 being pulled out right now. So they're doing pretty well from an economic standpoint. As we zoom out, Malaya expanded quite a bit into the Ming area. Um, what are your thoughts on Malaya moving forward? Are they strong enough to stop any Europeans from potentially impacting the trade?
In the next couple sessions, I think the short answer is yes. But as we get further out, the colonial nations are going to get a lot stronger. We saw that in two multiplayers ago, where a colonial nation in the Caribbean, which now we have Calypso there, but was able to be the strongest uh, power. And so, if you have a Malay and Ashikaga going navy focused, that's too good or decent, especially if Ashikaga forms Japan. They get the +10 ship durability. So those are two really decent naval powers, and they can stop. I think the only real naval power in the Europe right now is Great Britain. They can definitely stop Great Britain as it is, but as Portugal especially, but also Great Britain kind of build up their colonial nations, it's going to become increasingly more difficult um, for
And
these Asians.
we have a few new colors on the map. Qing, Nepal, former Korea, former Tibet. Both of these are very strong tags. And then we've got a big green angry bear working his way into Asia. What are your thoughts on those dynamics as the sessions progress here?
Yeah, so Ching and myself have currently a pretty good relationship. We'll see kind of how that plays out. Ching is definitely in a stronger position, I think, right now. And as you point out, they got all those claims that they can move on. Ching really needs to look at their eco going forward. What sort of land can I get? Who can I get it from without causing too many issues? Um, because if Malaya and Ashikaga are going to be focusing on the Navy, Ching is by far and away going to have to provide the bulk of the manpower as it currently stands. Because Nepal has access to some really good dev, but it's not going to be nearly as much as what Ching can have access to, especially with Malaya and Ashikaga taking some valuable stuff on the coast there. So um, I think that Russia is going to be an interesting question because they didn't make too as many moves as I expected coming into China. I think that rightfully so. He has a lot more European focused mindset right now. Russia does. Um, Considering what we'll get into later going on in Europe, I think Russia can't afford to spend a significant amount of time in Asia with his men and his troops, and that's what it would take to take out both myself and Nepal and Ching is a significant contribution. I do think Russia probably, especially with Rajputana as an ally, probably could get a good victory over us. I just think it would take him too much time and would open him up to some very strong players right now.
And you mentioned Rajputana, obviously the former Delhi, did a tag switch Rajputana, much stronger military tag overall, moved into Bengal towards the end of the last session. Um, our trio of Indian hug boxing seems to have become a duo, with Vijayanagar initially joining Bengal but quickly deciding against it and accepting a white peace from Rajputana. What's going to happen here? Is Bengal a good game, fought hard, and you're done, or do they have a chance?
So first thing I want you to do is you turn on the institution map mode. I think that'll kind of um, bring some good thought into this. And you see that, yeah, you see that Vijayanagar has the institution. Up till now, Bengal has mostly been doing the deving of institution and sharing with the others. Vijay gets the institution this time, sells it immediately to Rajputana, and then goes to Malaya instead of selling it to Bengal. Um, and this put Bengal really far behind and Rajputana ahead. And I think that gave the opportunity, along with the alliances that Rajputana pulled off, Russia and EU and the Ottomans, to kind of turn the tables, which I was expecting. I was a little hesitant last session, but you know, all the reasons we talked about before, Bengal is the kind of odd one out, and I think Vijay put himself in a very bad position here. Because he's more or less at the mercy of Rajputana, unless he can convince a lot of the other players to kind of help him. As for Bengal, I don't think it's GG quite yet. Rajputana can't take as much land as probably he'd like to, but unless something really happens, it's going to be GG very soon.
And before we shift over to the New World and touch on a number of new colonies and developments in that space, Mamelukes, Ethiopia have worked closely together. Both are now a body brethren. Um, Played a relatively quiet game as far as conflict is concerned. Do you see these two potentially being able to um, influence the balance of power in India, or do you think that VJ may truly be stuck in that box?
Um, Mamluk's ability to intervene, I think, depends largely upon you. Um, if you're willing to kind of guarantee their safety in one way or another, or at least not attack them, then I think they have a pretty good chance. Jamie in Spain is too occupied. Obviously, Two Sicilies is a little too occupied to make any moves. So as long as you're willing to kind of remain neutral or not invade the Mamluks, I think that he stands a very good chance. As for Ethiopia, Ethiopia certainly could, but they have more important things that they got to do. They got to take in um, Western Africa, and they got to figure out what they're going to do about the Cape. They kind of, no offense to him, but Just Dutch kind of dropped the ball there on the Cape. That was, um, yeah, no bueno.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up. Traditionally, if you are playing in this area, you want to take the Cape of Good Hope, especially the single center of trade in it, so that you can freeze all trade here in the Cape and then collect in Zanzibar, so that if a European wanted to pull trade out of here, they would have to put a trade fleet both in the Cape of Good Hope and in Zanzibar, rather than just being able to put a single trade fleet in Zanzibar, and then the English have almost complete domination, so can pull it all into the Ivory Coast here. We'll pivot now. New World, a little bit of a mess here with red on top of red, but that guy's colonies grew pretty drastically. He now has Smooth Jazz, Louisiana, the 13 colonies, Newfoundland, um, Georgia has ethnic New Georgia, and then we have Calypso in the Caribbean, we have Peru, we have Terra de Oro, we have Texas, we have Ashikagan, Mexico, and we have Alaska.
Oh, and don't forget New Spain down there.
Oh, Jesus, and New Spain. And as far as players go, we now have a 13 colonies player, we have an ethnic New Georgia player, we have a Calypso player, and we have an Alaska player. So a lot going on here. Zale, what's your take?
This is gonna be a flustercuck, I think, next time. It's gonna be very interesting to see what kind of happens, especially regarding Mexico, because you got three different players all bordering it. Four if you want to count um, the Great Britain, right? That guy who's looks like he's taking land off Lotharingia right now. I don't know that he's gonna get that in that war, but you never know. But yeah, it's gonna be very interesting because there's a lot of gold there, and that's a lot of money, especially for someone like Portugal. And especially for Spain. Spain's going to be looking for any sort of extra money he can get without having too much of a hard time. So we're probably going to see Spain try to blitz through Mexico as fast as possible once this war he's in gets done. And you're going to see the same from Ashikaga, because Ashikaga is running out of expansion as well. He's not going to invade Qing, even if he wanted to. Going naval, he doesn't quite have the quality to do that right now. And they've had such a good relationship that I seriously doubt it. And then Malaya's taking all the southern bits of China. He's running out of places he can expand to, and I think Mexico is his real breadbasket option. So, and then of course you have Alaska, who has done a remarkable job. He went from a 2-province nation until I don't know how many he has now, but it looks like it's 20 or so. He did a really good job expanding. We'll see what kind of comes from there.
29 provinces for Alaska. And they just raised the black flag, so they had to have had 6 or fewer coming into the session. So in terms of percentage growth, yeah, they quadrupled at least.
Yeah, so it's going to be very interesting. The only thing I would say is, as I mentioned before, the Asian powers that are present there don't quite have the same quality of land troops. Both the Asian powers there have focused more on naval. So that might come back to bite them later, or it might come very well if they're able to win some very lucky wars, perhaps convince Qing or myself, Nepal, maybe even Rajputana, work out some deal there to come over to the New World and help them out. In the long run, that might pay off, but it might also, they might also get just completely curb stomped. But it's definitely a big mess there.
And it does look, as of right now, the two main players are Great Britain, Portugal. So far, they've worked closely together. You'll see Great Britain has the majority of the trade down here in the Ivory Coast, and as a result, is pushing a decent amount into the Channel. The Channel being the most valuable node right now. Do you see any tensions rising as Portugal's player colony of Calypso establishes its naval dominance? Do you think Portugal's going to start challenging Great Britain in potential colonial wars, or do you think they both are more concerned about Central European threats?
Well, if I was them, I would be more concerned about Central European threats. Lotharingia stands a very good chance. We'll get into that just shortly. But there's a very good chance of controlling a huge portion of the Channel trade. And once France and Two Sicilies has kind of gone, Spain has put himself very kind of opposite of the Central Powers. And if Spain falls, Portugal's up on the chopping block. So I think okay, Great Britain, you get North America, I'll get South America, and we kind of go from there. I think that's the smarter option. But then, as you kind of can see, Texas, what's going on there, right? If we're really splitting it like this, kind of what's the end goal for Portugal? I don't know. It could be they have some sort of design, but perhaps there's something else going on. It could just be because it's Mexico, colonial Mexico. They're looking for that gold as well, which is fair enough. But I think right now they're probably looking to work together, but I could see it changing very quickly.
And we'll pivot over to Europe. To catch our viewers up, I'll do a quick synopsis. Early in the session, Spain reached a deal diplomatically with Two Sicilies, who they had been on opposite sides of battles previously, to work with Two Sicilies to take down the HRE. Two Sicilies, I think, rightfully saw their expansion was limited. They saw an opportunity to work with a strong player in Spain and attacked Italy. Spain and Two Sicilies beat Italy Switzerland, Lotharingia, I believe, were involved in the war. Afterwards, Lotharingia attacked France, pulling in Prussia and the Commonwealth in order to, uh, yeah, it's a clusterfuck here. In order to counter that, Spain and Two Sicilies declared a second war on Italy to try to relieve pressure on France. Um, as of right now, Prussia has shown why Vanilla Prussia is quite powerful with its over 130 discipline, and it stands that the Central Europeans will likely win both wars. France almost fully occupied, Two Sicilies almost fully occupied and on the verge of bankruptcy. That brings us up to speed. Looks like Italy is going to come out of this quite strong. Prussia doesn't stand much to gain from a territory perspective, but coming into the session, um, they were facing a coalition of players after their aggressive play in Lubeck and have earned the trust of quite a few allies. And Lotharingia, as you mentioned, probably stands to gain the most out of everything that occurred. What are your take on the situation?
Yeah, maybe hopefully we can do a follow up with Rayleigh and Jamie because I'd like their opinions. But for starters, I'm not really sure what Jamie is trying to do. I guess to give a little backstory on what's going on with France and Lotharingia, France was promised, in order to let Lotharingia live, France was promised the Duchy of Burgundy, which he has claims over, and I think perhaps Picardy as well. Um, and then Kaiser, who's playing Lotharingia, backstabbing. Fair enough. There's no hard feelings there. That's kind of what's going on. I'm not sure why, and it could be because Jamie has such a reputation as a player killer, and people always try to get rid of him and stuff. But I don't know that he necessarily deserves, but whatever. But I think the smarter play, especially given he was at odds with Two Sicilies, would have been for Jamie to kind of jumped in on France and maybe jumped in on Two Sicilies as well. So I'm not quite sure what Jamie is going on for there, or what his end game is. Perhaps he just didn't want to empower the Prussian bloc with Lotharingia and was trying to slow it down or something. Prussia, I think, is plenty strong as they are, so it's what they're doing now is a smart move, getting a lot of good, player relations going on. Lotharingia obviously is securing more of the channel, more territory, beating their biggest rival. But I think it's very important if you click on the click on Prussia and click on the Diplo mode, right? Because they'll show you pretty much all the wars going on. You can see in Central Europe two very obvious absences in what's going on right now, which is Austria and Westphalia. And Austria, of course, wasn't here last session, but I think that does tell if you look at their allies.
Sweden as well.
Yes,
and
of course.
It's important to note Westphalia, not involved in the war, has sent condottieri to Lotharingia and is actually providing 20 ducats a month of subsidies.
Yes. So it's interesting to kind of note that um, there's people that are kind of still holding their cards, is what I'm trying to say. Um, they're not fully committed, or perhaps Westphalia couldn't join the war because of alliance limits or something like that. But it's interesting to see who has, especially in Austria's case, their allies from before. They're allied to Westphalia and to Sicilies. Two Sicilies is dying. Westphalia, they're stuck between Prussia and Lotharingia, and they're doing everything in their power to, not, to keep good relations and do that stuff. So it's going to be a very hard session for Austria to come back, and it's also going to be very interesting to see what Russia and Sweden's responses are, because I think they missed a very good opportunity to kind of jump in earlier in these wars, and now they're going to be facing Prussia, Lotharingia, Commonwealth, fresh off the backs of major victories, two major victories. And so that's part of why I was saying I don't see Russia getting too involved with Nepal and cheating in India, because he can't spare the manpower, I believe, currently. They might have some deals going on that I don't know of, but even if you do, I'd be very careful about believing those deals, given that Lotharingia just broke their long-standing agreements, and Rajputana just broke their long-standing agreements. You have torsion. You're sitting here attacking people for money.
Oh
If I was
man,
Russia, I'd be very scared right now. Not scared, but careful. I'd be very cautious.
yeah, it was a tough session for me. I'll touch on that a little bit. Provide our viewers a little insight. As the Ottomans, basically stuck in between everybody. I've had decent relations with the Mamluks, both when you played it and now with Fizz. I was getting a little concerned about the ownership of the Aleppo node, as Persia drives so much value into Aleppo. So I made an aggressive play early in the session, caught Fizz a little off guard, but we worked through it diplomatically to take Syria. And then I attempted to insert myself into the first Two Sicily Italian War with Spain, but Rajputana and Russia quickly, I second guessed myself due to the potential invasion of them from my exposed flank if my armies marched towards Spain. I backed out. During the second Two Sicilies War, I went after Two Sicilies, extorted them for 1,000. Most of the session I was considering going in on Rajputana. As you mentioned, their alliances were a little fluid throughout the day. They were allied with Russia at one point, then they both were in the top 5, or top 4, so they could no longer be allied. And then Rajputana and I came to an agreement. We'll ally because due to the way the rules are shaped, that ensures that neither of us can betray each other because you can't truce break. So at least we'll have the 5-year warning. And then it allowed him to focus on Bengal and allowed me to focus towards Europe. But overall, I was twisting and turning. I didn't make an aggressive play. I probably should have. And I basically stalled out for the entire session.
Yeah, and I think that's a very similar predicament that a lot of people find themselves are starting to find themselves in. You had a very quiet session. Russia had a very quiet session. Sweden had a very quiet session. These the Mamluks, Ethiopia, all of you guys kind of in the center here, center line of the world, are having these quiet sessions because you're starting to find yourself blocked in. I think it's going to be very interesting because you're allied with Rajputana. Rajputana is allied with Russia, but you guys aren't allied. Right, so that makes Russia and you both have to okay, well, hold on. Meanwhile, Central Europe can grow stronger. Qing can go stronger. Nepal, myself, can go stronger, and that sort of all these opportunities on the periphery as well. You guys are boxed because you can't risk committing too much any one way. So,
And question for you that we always come to at this point of the show. There's a lot of active blue flames, whether it's in India or Europe. What are the next set of blue flames that we should expect to see on Saturday?
of course, I'm saying this, so it's probably not going to happen, but I 100% expect Rajputana to invade either myself or Vijayanagar, or both. They might have a deal, and they're not gonna do it directly after this war with Bengal. They can beat me for sure, but they would lose all their manpower, and they don't have any manpower to begin with. So they'd have to wait. And Vijay can't beat them in quality, but does have a huge amount of troops and a huge amount of eco. But I expect them to be attacking someone, Rajputana to be attacking someone this session. Maybe it's just that they'll just cycle will continue to beat on Bengal until it's fully consumed. We'll see. I think you're going to be in a player war. I believe, of course, France and Two Sicilies, I think, are going to continue to get hammered on. And I fully expect Russia and Sweden to make some sort of move to stop the growing power of Central Europe. I'm not quite convinced that's going to be a player war, but they might try to do something diplomatically first. But I don't think it's going to work out. I think they're going to have some blue flames popping up in their future.
Yeah, I guess maybe at this point in the season, it might be a better question to ask what country will not have blue flames next to their name on Saturday.
Yeah, I think Westphalia probably won't. I think they're going to continue to do what they're doing right now, which is having a strong little game, building themselves up, sending their troops to the people around them via condottieri. So not really pissing anyone off, but making some good relations, giving ducats and all that stuff. I think that's where we're gonna see no player war.
And
And then Portugal's done a pretty good job as well.
there's some interesting mechanics at play from a multiplayer perspective that I'll point out. When you do have a large number of players at this phase of the game, when there's less territory to eat, mana generation becomes a limiting factor to how strong your country can get. So being able to increase your dev by effectively um, spending those monarch points is important. And when you have multiple countries, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players in a small area, going up against maybe 1, 2, 3 players, because they're generating monarch points across 7 countries rather than 3 countries, even though the land right now may be equal from a dev perspective or a force limit perspective, uh, the larger number of players actually can outscale the smaller number of players. It's a challenge that I was facing with Ottomans versus India. On paper, force limit wise, we were about even, but every session that gets further and further away from me, as Rajputana, Vijay, and Bengal could dev up versus just me deving up. And it'll be interesting to see just how much power is going to come out of Europe as you take a look at this dev map mode. We have quite a few yellowish areas starting to appear, which refers to 20 dev, and then some even darker ones as well. So it'll be interesting to see what this dev map mode of Central Europe looks like next week.
Absolutely, yes. It's going to be. I think that's something also a lot of new players kind of overlook as well. So it's good that you brought that up, because it's going to play a very big factor, especially for those smaller nations like Switzerland, Westphalia, currently Italy. We'll see how that turns out after this war. But so
Honestly, I think Italy's
Italy,
in an
yeah,
extremely strong position. Economically, they're making a decent amount of money. 100 puts them towards the top of Europe. 120 over here in Spain. Great Britain, obviously, is leagues ahead, but they stand to gain a decent amount of land here off of two Sicilies. And it's very good dev here in the Tuscany area. 27, 17, 25, 22. Um, I think Italy's in a fantastic position moving forward.
yeah, I'd have to agree with you.
Oh, but come on, guys. One other thing to point out: use the terrain map mode. Move your forts onto mountains. Get them out of the woods. Get them onto mountains. Get them off the hills. Get them into mountains. Um, yeah, that was an issue that occurred in the Two Sicilies War. He did have a mountain fort here in Abruzzi, but he had a fort in Naples and not in Avellino. So a fort on farmlands is worthless, essentially. It's just a speed bump. Whereas a fort on a mountain is a tremendous advantage. So,
Yes,
Italy, sort out
especially
your forts.
especially as we get more and better cannons. Those those farmland forts and flatlands forts are going to be pretty much next to useless going forward.
Yep. Any final thoughts?
Um, yeah, we. I guess the only thing is I'm really interested to see how these naval wars are gonna shape up from here. Um, it's gonna be there's a lot of players going naval ideas this time. It's kind of interesting to see that. And so I'm wondering, who's really gonna come out on top.
Yep, we currently have Malaya, Ashikaga, Alaska, and Calypso, I believe, are all naval ideas. Yep. So it'll be interesting to see what's next for them. Well, Zale, appreciate the time as always, and look forward to speaking with you next week.
Yeah, man. Good luck, as you're gonna have some fun this time, I think.
Hopefully.